Starting with workflows. So workflows is essentially an automation. There's three parts that's very important for you to know about workflows. There is one, it's the trigger. How and when should this automation start? So what actually triggers the automation? There's few different options that we have by default available to you. One is when a record is created. So in any record in a database can actually trigger an automation to start. This is used in digital marketing, for example, when a new lead is generated in a database. So perhaps they want a series of actions to happen. Maybe that new record could be a task. A task is generated for an individual, a staff member, certain action to happen, or an event. So any record in a database could be actually used as one of these triggers. Second, if the record has been updated. So again, any changes, any modification in existing records. Often this is used, for example, if customer wants a notification if a member goes online and changes something on their account. That would be something about modification. Or perhaps if you want to trigger an action to start or a workflow to start when a change is made on an event. All of those can be considered as an update. Deleting, this is actually something I do sometimes use to be able to answer one of the concerns some customers might have. In some RFP requests, there is requests to not be able to allow a record to be deleted without approval. So one solution for that is obviously taking the permission. The other solution is to create a workflow. So if a record is deleted, maybe a manager can get notified that certain record has been deleted, so they're aware of that basic action happening. Next is when a button is clicked. So we talked about custom buttons last time. You can create a button. You can link that button to a workflow. So you can say, anytime I click this button, do the certain action. You can put a button, let's say send welcome email on a customer, and link that to an email. So as soon as you click that button, an email goes out to the customer with a certain content. Or a button that maybe generates a task or something along those lines. And lastly, we have every hour. This is essentially a time-based workflow that you are able to set the system to check on a regular basis, and if the criteria are met, the action happens. This could be in workflows, for example, such as maybe birthday notification, things like that, that you want the system to check all contacts, and if a certain criteria is true, you complete it. So let's just go in, very basic workflow to start with, and we start with contact or client in this case, and we want to create maybe a lead notification, or actually let's do a welcome email. You have to activate the rule. So for something like welcome email, which trigger do you guys think is the right trigger?
When a record's created.
All right, when a record is created. So one thing with the time-based workflow, if you check the time-based workflow, you're not able to actually check any of the values on top because it's going to check on a regular basis. However, if you check any of the values on top, like created, you can also have updated and deleted and so on and so forth. For some of these records, you get this option. You get anytime the criteria is met or only once. So that means that for that one record that actually triggers this workflow, if that record meets the criteria again, do you want this workflow to be triggered again or only once in the history of that record? So if you're setting up something like a welcome email, perhaps basically, you can set it as only once. So a lot of times, maybe if they have a task for a staff to welcome them when they registered into a course or when they've filled up a form, perhaps they want that to happen only the first time. The next important thing about workflows is the rules. So the rules define really what you want it to happen and in what circumstances. One thing to note that you can actually have multiple rules. So you can generate multiple rules that trigger different levels of action. Every rule, when you want to create it, obviously there is a name. There is the ability for you to be able to filter records, so perhaps you don't want this action to happen in every contact record that is created. You want it only happen on contact records that are created and follow a certain criteria. So then you can define your criteria. Maybe their age is above a certain day, maybe they came from a certain marketing campaign, maybe they came from the online form, so you can actually build additional rules on top of that to be able to target certain records only. Does that make sense? And the last important part is the action. What action do you want to happen? So the actions that you have insert action. You're able to trigger a record to be created on any other object in the system. So an example, one of the common ones that I always use in my trainings is creating a task. So perhaps every time a new contact is created, I want to create a task for a staff member to follow up with them. Welcome the new member. And you can set due date of that. So what you're seeing right now is the actual page layout for that object. So if I had chosen a different object, you would have seen that exact page layout that's defined and assigned to their users. So I can use formula fields for the date. So due date is today, type is the call, owner, and I can assign a certain user to it. So I want this person, Ali, to, or PM support, to contact them. So every time basically a new contact gets created now, a task gets generated for them as well. What you can do with actions, you can actually stack actions together. So you can actually have additional actions as well. For example, you can send an email. Email is one of those actions that you can utilize. Perhaps you want to send an email to the customer welcoming them, or email to your staff letting them know that this has happened. You can also do update. So update gives you the ability to update a record in the system. And let's say we want to actually maybe make a change on that certain same customer profile and adjust something on the page. So because this time I chose the client object, it showed me the page layout for client. So I can, if I want to actually change something on this, basically any of the values, I can type in, I can select it, and I can set that this should be defined. There's a trick here because you don't want to just update any record. You have to define what record you want an update. Does anyone in the room know how to do that? All right, good. So you actually have to reference this contact. So right now, this is just the contact record. I'm telling you to go make this update. Add need info, put whatever I'm typing here. But I'm not really saying which record. There is no indication right now which contact record I want to update. So right now, based on how I've set it up, nothing is going to happen. It's going to try to go update a contact record. It just doesn't know which one, so it's going to skip this action. What you have to do, you have to identify which record. The best way to actually identify a record is based on the contact ID. That's a unique number for every record. You can either type in something if you want always a certain record to be updated, so you can actually assign it that record, or you can actually choose some of the formulas that we have. If I can read them. It says trigger record name. So this is going to actually populate the record name that came from the actual record that initiated this workflow. So we're really forcing the system to update the same record that was created. If that makes any sense. So we're going to press save, and I can have additional actions as well. The action with email, if I am selecting an email action, it's going to bring up the next page where I can say the recipient, so who I want it to go to. I can choose, for example, the email account for the customer. You can choose what SMTP account to use. We covered this last time, but really where the email should come from. So you can say come from marketing at perfectmind.com or help@perfectmind.com or an individual. And then you can have to define your email template that you're going to use. You can create a brand new email template, and email template can have merge fields. So you can define certain merge fields to populate information maybe from your organization or from customer, maybe logo of the organization, maybe name of the individual saying, thank you, John, thanks for signing up. One trick to know is actually our email editor in browser is more powerful than what we have in Smart Client. We've stopped upgrading Smart Client a very long time ago. So If you want to actually be able to create a very good HTML email, you want to actually access more merge fields and things like that, it's best for you to create this action or modify this action after creating it in the browser. I'm going to show you guys how you can do that. You would have to first kind of put the placeholder here, because we don't actually have workflow system in, at least ability to create workflows in browser. But after the actions are created, then you are able to actually update those actions in the browser.
Does it, like if I still want to choose the SMTP account coming from?
You can do it from here, and you can update it also in the browser. Both will be possible. So I created this action. So right now I don't have any rules. So technically any contact that I create should trigger this workflow. So let's test it, and we'll find out if this works or not. Log out and log back in just in case. Battery packaging. All right. So first thing to note is that if I go into the setting where you are able to actually see this automation now built, you would see it under the automation screen. These are all the workflows, and now that I've created it from here, first of all, I have the ability to enable and disable it. So if I don't want to use it anymore. And secondly, if I click through it, these are the 3 actions that I had created. I can now go and, let's say, update that email template. That email template. And I have an HTML editor, so I can actually make much more advanced changes if I need to. And the other thing is this insert button, we actually could now get to more objects if you need to. So I can send it to the email on the account versus on the client. So you have a little bit more functionality here. Now let's test this workflow. So technically, I have a task now. You see that one? Welcome the new member. That's already been created for me. And that text that I put it got populated as well. And an email tried to go out. It didn't go out because it didn't have an email. But that's as basic as simple as it is. It's now, knowing this tool, there's a lot of things you can do. Every business is slightly different. Every business will have their own processes and different things you are able to set up for them. But as you can see, it's a very, very advanced tool, and you can do quite a bit with it. Now, going back here, with the rules, as I mentioned, you can have multiple rules. And this is, so maybe I can have an email go out to, customers that came from a certain campaign, a different email and different tasks go to a different individual. And second rule is for people basically with different categories. Maybe with the welcome, I'll use the age. So I say if the client's age is below a certain age, maybe I send it to a staff member that's responsible for, junior customers, and the basically senior members go to a different individual. So I can actually just define these rules as I go. So I can have greater than, 15 years old to go to this person. So this is my first rule. And then I can define a second rule, third rule, and so on and so forth. One thing about rules that is important is actually a logic behind rules is that, and how important it is in what order you put them in. The system is going to go through the rules from the first to the last. As soon as it meets the criteria of the first rule, it's going to execute the workflow and it's going to end at that point. It's not going to scan the rest of the rules. So it's important how you define it. So you're probably, if you want to make a very advanced workflow, you want to create your very unique criteria first and your catch-all criteria at the end as your last rule. So it's going to go to the first one. If they meet that criteria, they're going to get an email. If they don't, it's going to go to the second rule. Do they meet that criteria? Yes or no? If no, it's going to go to the last criteria, which is basically criteria to capture everyone.
So if you wanted to create like AND logic and OR logic, would you have to do that within the rule, or can you do rule 1 and rule 2? Or
There,
rule 1
on the rules, you can define it. Within the rules, when you're creating the filters, you have the ability to create AND or OR. So the filter part, if you have anything more than 2 filters, you get that criteria in, as you can see. There's actually a hidden trick here too. I think it's way too much for our session today, but you can actually code your criteria here too. You gotta click like beside the T and it opens up some odd thing. Yeah. It's a hidden, we build it for ourselves, but we can utilize it.
Top secret.
Top secret. Top secret. So let's actually go to one of the examples that it comes up often, at least in enterprise. One thing that I get all the time is waitlist notifications. Everyone that I've heard of that says, well, if someone goes on the waitlist or if the waitlist spot opens up, can the staff member get notified? Can the customer get notified? That is a possibility. You can actually create a workflow for that, and you can set that. They can't confirm it, but they can get an email saying that the spot is open, right? How they can do that? Let's create that event, by the way.
Yeah.
So if I ever want to actually build that rule, it's really based on the attendance record. As you guys can see, there is attendance records in the system. Right now, the capacity is full, and everyone's marked as booked. If I add...
Maybe some new Chris. Yeah.
That's great. As you guys can see, when I've added a 4th person, because the capacity is full, they're going to go on wait list. And this here is an actual attendance status. So technically, I can utilize this to be able to generate a workflow for myself. I would have been able for the rest of the stuff as well. So if I want to create a workflow based on that, oops, put it in the wrong area. What object do you guys think I should start with? Brian? Should know. All right, attendance object. So the reason is these records that you see on the calendar, and we're creating an actual object relation document that's going to make it a little bit easier for everyone to visualize it. But every record that you see under the event is an attendance record. So we are able to actually use that as our primary object to use. Wait list, we're going to actually create it. So what should be our trigger? Yeah, I would actually put both. I would put created, because if this person has been added to wait list, or they've been probably moved back to wait list. If you want to do it, if you don't want to cover the moving back to wait list, you can remove it. Record is created though is for any brand new registrations. The rule.
You're doing when they are just added to the wait list.
Correct. We can do for all of them. We can set different rules, right? So we can maybe set up the first email that thank you, you've been added to the wait list, and the second basically email after they've been added to waiting for confirmation. So let's say actually the first rule should be for when they were added to wait lists. Anyone can help with the filtering?
Status?
Good job, Mike.
You get one every swap.
Yeah. And
Every customer.
waiting. We're really mimicking what we were seeing on the surface. So waiting, and I'm going to say, I don't know, send an email. You can fill these up like just temporarily, and then you can go back to the browser and actually change it. Wait. Okay, so this is my first rule. So if I was at it, now I can create the second rule. Name confirmation, I think it's the name. And status, does anyone know the actual status for this? I made it easy for you. Status. I'm just guessing at this point. All right. And we do another email to myself. So at this point, they can actually create tasks. Like one of the business cases is, someone needs to call the customer and actually confirm. So perhaps they can create a task for that individual. That they can see a task in their task list. The task can also generate an email and notify them that there's a new task created for you. But then they get that, they contact the customer, they complete the task, and they either confirm the customer as being, valid on the wait list or not.
In your example, though, it's different emails that I'm sending. Can you have a separate email per rule, or do you have to have a separate one per workflow?
No, you can have separate one per rule. You can actually have multiple ones per rule. Because the place that we actually have actions, you can create another email action to go to a different person. So you can have on the action of wait list, I can send one email with a certain content that go to my staff, another email to go to the customer.
So they have the same trigger.
They have the same trigger, they have the same rule, but the actions are different. So now that I created this, technically, type very loud, my friend.
Angry.
Yeah, it seems like it. See, the task is being, the workflow has been created. This group under the attendance object because it's based on the attendance object. And here I actually have the two actions. I can go into the action, and I can actually set the two. So here you actually have more rules. So that's why it's really good to actually be in the browser. So I can say send it to the client email, or maybe send it to the client secondary email. And in terms of the content here, at this point, you can change it to anything that you want. Does anyone know what elements are? Well, digital marketing knows because that's really their life. So elements are actually really cool, and it's going to be, the reason I brought it up is because you are able to also insert elements into emails. Elements are it's essentially an HTML box. So what you're able to do in the database level, you can go under marketing, under website setting. Now it's used more than websites, so kind of sometimes doesn't make sense. You go update elements. You have some elements that come by default in the system. You can delete them if you don't want to use them. Make sure you don't delete something that's being used, especially if you have, websites built, if you have ID cards and things built, because we use elements a lot. Digital marketing uses it a lot. So I can define a new element box. So I can say, let's say, new news. That's basically an element I want to create. And this is a box that I'm going to be able to, on an organization level, go in and update. So anytime there's new news for the organization or new events, maybe featured events, maybe promotions, maybe student of the month, customer of the month, whatever that basic example is, I can go in and in one place update that content. What the system allows us to do is when I'm creating any type of emails, workflows, documents, I can utilize that element. So now that I have that, refresh this page, I can go insert that element in my email template. There you go. So what this does, when this email is sent out, it's going to take the content in the box that I had created and populate in this email. This is very, very powerful because, as an organization gets bigger and as they utilize these tools more and more, they're going to have tons and hundreds of different email templates. It's going to be very difficult for them anytime there's a new update in their organization to go into each email and update all of them one by one. They're going to miss one. So then they can go into one central place update that central place, and the result change the communication in all their automated emails, all the workflow emails, and any templates that they've had. Richmond Oval uses this brilliantly. All their templates that they have is all full of elements. They have news as elements, they have sponsorships as elements, so when they change things, they don't actually have to go redefine all their email templates. Very, very useful, very powerful tool, especially if you're working with a customer that has a good, strong marketing team. They would be loving this. And technically, this is an HTML box, so you can actually put code in here as well. How digital marketing sometimes uses this is actually they use, essentially different pieces of code that they can call. The website that they create is actually multiple elements. A lot of it is not coded per page because they want to use the same code over and over again. Okay, so I'm updating this, and now if I go back to our workflow, if anyone in our business process would have canceled and in result this person would have gone into pending confirmation status, now because they meet that criteria, they would have got that email. Make sense? And you can do it again for any record in the system. So I could have had one for canceled. I could have had one for, basic as soon as I confirm. All of these would be able to actually utilize as triggers. The opportunities are essentially endless, depending on which business you're facing. Any questions about workflows?
Can they be applied to the online environment for registration? Or?
Yeah. Yeah, we have a workflow already in the system for new online sales, for example, that you can enable as soon as an online sale is done. Any record, whether it's online or on site, it does create or update a record in the database, and that record can be basically initiate a workflow, and cause certain action.